It's dangerous to say that breath progresses because there are a collection of reflexes that are designed to protect us from damage. They're evolutionarily sound, but they're highly inefficient. Because of this very large brain that we have, we can develop strategies for improving skills. We can become masterful at cognitive and fine motor skills, just like we can at gross motor, large activities. When we look at the masterful performance of athletes, as an example, athleticism or sports being a proxy for cognitive and fine motor skills, we can see that breath changes the more proficient that they become. We also see when somebody enters a sport that their first execution of a skill is highly efficient and protective breath reflexes kick in to avoid the individual damaging themselves. So there's a base layer, a base level of breathing reflex to protect us from damage. If I'm about to be hit by something, or if I'm about to move something unusually heavy, the most foundational breathing reflex will kick in, called the valsalva maneuver. I will inhale and I will grunt. It is a necessary reflex for us to protect ourselves and from damage and be able to survive an instance once. So the proverbial lifting of the car off of the baby occurs. I can move a weight that I never have moved before by inhaling, creating a pneumatic belt which connects my upper body to my lower body, and grunting, increasing my blood pressure and increasing my generalized tension throughout my body, and I can achieve that. It will come at a high cost because that reflex was designed to survive, not to thrive. When we see that someone moves from that initial fear reflex to a base level of skill, there's an attitudinal change that accompanies it. Anger. Anger's not a negative emotion, it's just an emotion. It has positive effects. We would rather that someone be able to fight through a situation than cringe and withdraw from it. So with that change in emotional attitude towards achieving an objective, there's a change in breathing. What we would call a modified valsalva, an inhale, but there'll be a pressurized exhale to move that weight to achieve that skill. You have much of the generalized tension available to you, but without the back pressure that can cause the body damage. A person that is able to have that pressurized exhale will be able to achieve, with practice, the same amount of weight moved as the person that does the full valsalva, the fear reflex breathing. But it takes some practice. It takes some attention, and it takes focus. The body's default is the greatest protective system possible, which is fear breathing. As we look at someone who is moving from a base level of skill, anger breathing, inhale, and a pressurized exhale, to a level of discipline where they've developed a practice over months and years, they're able to exhale with that particular weight or that particular volume of activity. They're able to exhale whenever there's effort, like a metronome. And you notice when I gave that example, I'm not actively inhaling. The force of my exhale is just relaxed. And there's a passive inhale. And that back pressure pulls in the next inhale. I don't need to pull in the inhale. I'm not having a preparatory phase. I'm with my discipline, like a metronome, squeezing the sponge, wringing out the sponge so that when the sponge relaxes, atmospheric air rushes in due to the negative back pressure. Disciplines where we see most good athletes. Disciplines where we see someone with an activity that they feel safe in, whether it be gardening or carpentry or whatever trade that requires some physical effort, you'll see a person exhaling on effort. But there's a step. There's a step and there's a change when someone has done a particular activity for an extended amount of time and they sink into the activity. They evaporate into connection with what they're doing. It is no longer a disciplined practice. There's just this state of flow. Flow's become an overused and misused term, so I tend to avoid it. But flow in itself is being moved or being breathed by the activity itself. So if I twist or wring out a washcloth, the fluid will squeeze out. If I twist my body, there's very little effort, but it will wring out the washcloth and I will exhale as a result of the movement. You have all experienced flow breathing every day in things that you might not pay attention to, like walking. Walking is the most repeated activity that there is. So you are constantly in a state of being breathed by your movement when you walk. You're ventilating yourself, unless there's some type of internal tension, internal pain, adaptation from long periods of sitting, some type of stress. If there's nothing else that is unusual in your day, then you are being breathed by that locomotion. Yet there's something on the other side of that. After thousands of hours of practice at a particular skill, there's something else that happens. The period at which the body is most quiet, where it is most settled, and yet you have access to 100% of your resources, is at the end of your exhale. Notice that the opposite of that, the period at the top of your inhale, is where you're least connected, where you have the most activation of your fight or flight side of your nervous system, the sympathetic side of your nervous system. So it is most at the top of your inhale, connected to reflexes. At the bottom of your exhale, there's a place of solitude where you will find, across sport, the greatest amount of fine motor control and cognitive skill. At the end of the exhale, you'll find the execution of high-level skills across sport, whether that be in archery or in martial art or in driving. Driving seems to be the concept that we are all most familiar with autopilot. You're driving in a familiar area in a constant speed, so there aren't threats on the road, and you lose concept of time. And suddenly it rushes back to you, you come off autopilot, and you take an inhale and a sigh. Why did that occur? Because that autopilot occurs at the bottom of that exhale, in the length of the pause at the cessation of the exhale. We use this scale as an example of how do I adapt to the protocol that I'm using in an exercise. Whatever the skill is that I've been performing, when am I ready to move on or progress? If I find that I am dropping down to a level of inhaling and bracing, fear level, or if I'm dropping down to the point where I have to inhale and pressurize, anger breathing, and I am no longer at the level of discipline, then it's time for me to regress. It's time for me to decrease volume, decrease intensity, decrease complexity, whatever's necessary, so that I can get back to a disciplined breath, exhaling on effort. Contrarily, if I find that I move from exhaling on effort on each repetition of an exercise, like a metronome, to suddenly I'm doing multiple repetitions with a single exhale, and I move into flow, I know that I can increase the challenge. I can increase the weight, I can increase the volume, I can increase the frequency, I can increase the complexity, because my body's adapted to it. If I'm in flow, I'm no longer receiving positive adaptation. So we can look at our breath as a window into our readiness to progress or regress with our physical exercise. And ultimately, the carryover there is when we find that we are developing ourselves to the point where we're extending the period of cessation at the end of the exhale, when we've become masterful, we can move on to the next set of skills. Build that so that we can increase our individual human potential by expanding our toolbox that we've mastered.